Hello, my name is Alex Trembath and I am the Interim Head of Communications at the International Hydropower Association. And on the occasion of Global Hydropower Day, I am joined today by Anton-Louis Olivier. Anton-Louis is an experienced CEO and entrepreneur with more than 25 years of international experience in the renewable energy sector. Back in 2006, he founded the Renewable Energy Holdings Group companies in South Africa, where he served as CEO until 2021. He continues to play a leading role in the sector, including as a vice president of the International Hydropower Association, and also as a senior hydropower advisor at Scatec, which is one of the world's leading renewable energy companies and is at the forefront of hydropower development in Africa. So, Anton-Louis, thank you for joining us today. And to begin with, I would like to ask you, what was your personal journey to becoming involved in hydropower? What inspired you to work in the industry?
Hi, Alex. Yeah, I've been in hydropower for probably the best part of 2 decades. I've always worked in renewable energy in developing countries, in Africa and in Latin America. At some point, about 20 years ago, I identified what I thought was a great project opportunity in South Africa to build an independent power plant. In those days, this wasn't happening in South Africa. I identified the opportunity and then foolishly embarked on trying to build a hydropower plant as an independent power producer. Well, I eventually succeeded. It was the first IPP to be registered in South Africa. Things have progressed way beyond that in the country already, but found out that, being trained as an engineer, I like the challenges that hydro presents and also the benefits that hydropower bring, specifically as, in my mind, being the true sustainable renewable plant technology. From those initial days, the business grew, which I built up over time. And found out that, this is a sector where there's great opportunities sort of one thing led to another. And yeah, that's where I am today.
Thank you. And to dig a little bit deeper into the benefits of hydropower you mentioned and the opportunities, why is hydropower so important today as part of the renewable energy mix and also as a solution to climate change?
I speak specifically in a sub-Saharan African context. That's the market I work in that I know in best. And in sub-Saharan Africa, probably about outside of South Africa, half of all installed generation capacity is hydropower. And most of those plants are more than 30 years old. So hydropower is sort of the original electricity power provider on the continent of Africa. And it's still keeping the lights on across the region. It's that combination of factors which I found really of hydropower, which really just makes sense within the African context. We've got abundant resource available, the technology, and it's matches what the continent need historically, and now these days where we are adding on vast amounts of intermittent renewables. You see solar IPPs coming up all over the region. I mean, this is like probably the dominant technology on the continent at the moment. But in order to integrate intermittent renewables, specifically in weak grids, and most African countries do have weak grids, you need something to balance that. And hydropower is ideally positioned to do that through the flexibility, through the ancillary services that it provides to grids, but also through dispatchability. So I think the role of hydro has changed, but it's emerged in a new context as just as important as it's been in the past.
Thank you. I'd really like to know more about what Scatec is doing in the hydropower space. We've spoken about how Scatec is one of the leaders in the renewable energy space worldwide. And I understand there's some very forward-thinking projects that the company is embarking upon. Can you talk a little bit about what are Scatec's priorities and what is the strategy for the future?
Yeah, Alex, I'm really excited to be a member of the Scatec hydropower team. This company is doing great things globally, but specifically in Africa and specific around hydropower. Scatec originated as a solar IPP. They bought what was then known as SN Power, which was a global hydropower developer and owner of hydropower plants about 2 years ago, integrated that company. And since then, Scatec has not just through this move, but emerged as a multi-technology company, where previously, was Scatec Solar and was very solar focused. Scatec is now looking at all renewable technologies, including battery energy storage as well, globally, to see what makes the best fit in the region or globally for power needs. In the African region specifically, Scatec is one of the few players, private sector players, that can play at scale. For example, Scatec, together with its partner EDF, has recently been announced as the strategic sponsors, in effect, the developers for the 350 megawatt hydropower plant called Mpatamanga, which is in Malawi. Scatec's also involved in 300 megawatt size projects in Rwanda, Burundi, DRC, the Ruzizi 3 project, and is looking at other large opportunities in the hundreds of megawatts range across the continent. And if you look around who's active in the region, you'll see that large hydro on the African region is typically built by Chinese contractors, but this is on a EPCF, a build and finance type of basis. These aren't IPPs, and they're not owned by these contractors. So it's built for host governments. Independent power producers, which are becoming more and more common, driven, as I said, by the solar initiatives, needs private ownership. And Scatec is one of the few players who's got the balance sheet, the track record, the know-how to do this at scale on the African continent.
That sounds fascinating. And when it comes to these big groundbreaking projects, it's sometimes difficult for us to translate what that actually means to people's lives. And that's why on Global Hydropower Day this year, we want to talk about what are the real benefits of hydropower to people. Could you maybe just talk a little bit about some of the projects that you've mentioned? How do you see these having a real impact on the livelihoods of people and on communities?
Africa as a whole is marked still by very low levels of access to power, access to electricity. It's been creeping up. It's stagnated for decades, but fortunately now countries have started focus on providing improved access to electricity for their populations. But you need generation capacity to support that. It's shocking to know that there are, I think, in the order of, it's 10, 15 African countries where the installed capacity per country is less than 500 megawatts. That would be a large mining operation typically in a developed country. So there's huge shortages of power capacity. So, and bringing new capacity online in a sustainable manner, and specifically taking climate change impact into account, really just is tailored for hydropower. So I think hydro has got huge developmental impacts possible in Africa. And then, there's an anecdote that I like to relate from one of my IHA colleagues who's running a major utility in the southeast of the United States. He said, where you've got towns that were based on coal-fired power, once the coal mine's been depleted, those towns die and they become like, rust belt towns. Where you've got settlements and communities that are based around hydropower, they still continue to be vibrant and sustainable. And I think that's sort of a lesson also, specifically in South Africa, where we're coming off a 50 gigawatts of coal-fired baseload generation mix that we need to change. We've got an aging fleet, we need to change it to renewables. And we've got huge issues with this, what's called the just transformation and transition, and what to deal with communities that for decades been living on coal-fired power. Hydro doesn't have those problems. So I think in various ways, from just enabling lights to be switched on to supporting broader economies. Hydro can play, as part of the energy mix, a huge role in development.
And that will, of course, involve a huge stepping up in terms of the capacity, in terms of the resources that we put into the development of hydropower. And that will involve probably many more people than it has done in the past. How can we educate and involve more people in hydropower as we tread this pathway towards net zero?
That is a definite challenge. And hydro by its very nature, I mean, the first hydropower plants were constructed in the late 19th century. It's seen as an old technology. So one of the challenges that hydro face is to be attractive enough to young new workers that need to come into the sector. I think one of the IHA's assessments in its hydropower outlook says that, we need to add as much new hydropower on globally as that we've done to date in the past 130 years. That's a huge challenge, and we're not going to do it without people. I mean, on Scatec's side, Scatec's committed on its new 5-year plan, which it unveiled recently. This is across technology, but $1 billion in new equity investment into independent power producers globally and across technologies. Again, that's 1.5 gigawatts of new power per year. A significant part of that we hope to be hydro. So there's investment, there's focus around it, and I think the emergence of multi-technology companies like Scatec, and there's others globally around as well, do provide interesting places where people can see themselves having challenging and worthwhile employment. And I think that's really the route that we will need to take to ensure that we attract the right people and the right skills into the sector. And increasingly future integration of hydro with other technologies, I think, will help hydro also step up and to maintain its relevance.
One of the questions that always comes up when it comes to new hydropower development is how the environmental impact can be managed. How do you think we can make sure that hydropower is built in a way that is not only respectful to the environment, but also leaves communities better off than they were before?
Yeah, this was the stick that hydro was beaten with for many years, and I think not always deservedly, but in some cases, yes. But hydro has learned, and I think the IHA has specifically taken a lead with its development of the sustainability standards and initiatives like the San Jose Declaration around sustainable hydropower, that the only way that hydropower should be developed is sustainable. And it's like with anything else, you don't develop every single gas field you find. You don't develop every single wind resource you find. The same with hydropower. We need to develop those which are sustainable. And we are better able to judge what is sustainable now than in the past, in the 50s and 60s, when large fleets of hydro were built across the planet. And I think in some cases, hydro is leading what it means to be a truly sustainable technology. Solar and wind is relatively new. We haven't seen really large-scale decommissioning of wind and solar farms. I mean, you're starting to hear stories about, what do you do with the old wind turbine blades? They can't be recycled and so forth. Hydropower has gone through all of those issues. We've dealt with issues like, should plants be built or impact on protected areas? Factors which other technologies only now being faced with. So I think hydro has gone a long way. We're not 100% there yet, but we're certainly far way better positioned now to judge what is sustainable and to evaluate projects beforehand and identify impacts and also being able to mitigate impacts. So I think one can be comfortable to say that, these days you can build sustainable hydro.
Thank you. Finally, we've seen organizations like the International Energy Agency and the International Renewable Energy Agency report in their net zero pathways that we will only be able to bring global temperature rises under control with a significant upscaling of hydropower development. We're talking about a doubling of global capacity in the next 30 years. But what we're seeing in the reporting that we've been doing and the tracking of global hydropower development is that development is not happening at the pace required to meet those pathways. So What do you think we can do? How can we accelerate our move to a global energy, renewable energy future?
Yeah, it's unfortunately the reality that we faced with every day. I mean, the project like Patamanga has taken many years to develop. This is the 350 megawatt hydro in Malawi that I mentioned, that Scatecs together with EDF developing. And it's taken tens of millions of dollars to develop. Once built, it will double the installed capacity of Malawi. So it's and through a renewable and sustainable technology. But it takes a very long time. And I think that is the main area where we need to look at in Africa, but also globally, is around the process and the planning towards hydro. We need to shorten those timelines. You know, we got to be developing the projects now that we want to be online in 5 to 10 years from now. If we in 5 to 10 years realize, batteries isn't all that we hoped it would be, it's still not helping us with sort of longer term and large volume storage, we need more dispatchable, so pump storage or reservoir hydro. If we only realize that in 5 years, it's going to be too late. We need to start now on developing the projects that we want to have online at that time. And the biggest barriers that we face now isn't financing. There's financing available, but it's really around planning, permissions, and policies around that that needs to be accelerated. I think globally we're following an overcautious approach around development. Coming from the history of some hydros in the past that had very negative impacts associated with it. But I think because we're so much smarter now in our assessment of projects in the early stage, we don't need to worry about that too much. We've got the right tools to assess projects on their sustainability, and I think we should look at ways of fast-tracking that in order to get more hydro online. Because if we don't, we're simply going to be ending up relying on fossil fuels for much longer and much more than we would want to.
Thank you very much, Anton-Louis. So that concludes our interview. So thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Alex, my pleasure.